Okay, here's a video on the practice quiz explaining all the questions on the practice quiz 3.1, which is really talking about equations that are in function form and also standard form. And of course, these are linear equations. When you graph them, they graph lines. Let's begin. Number one, it says fill in the blank. It says find the y-intercept of this equation. Okay, so in order for us to find the y-intercept, you need to remember these two things, x-intercept or y-intercept. You need to remember these two things. To find the x-intercept, we set y equal to 0 and solve. To find the y-intercept, we set x equal to 0 and solve. Okay, so let's remember what is an x-intercept. It's where your graph will cross the x-axis. All right, so how do you know where your lines are going to cross the x-axis? Well, you set y equal to 0 and solve. Okay, to find the y-intercept, you set x equal to 0 and solve. Now, what does this mean? It means that on your coordinate, when you try to find the x-intercept, you set y equal to 0. Okay, so a coordinate is an x value and a y value. The y value will be 0. Okay, that's what you're doing. You're setting the y value to be 0. Okay, and what you're trying to do here is you're going to solve. Solve for what? You're going to solve for x. You're going to find that missing x value. Okay. To find the y-intercept, we set x equal to 0. I know this is kind of long, I apologize. But to find the y-intercept, we set x equal to 0. So in a coordinate, what does that look like where your x is equal to 0? Well, your x value, the first number of your ordered pair, that will be 0. And the y value is what you're going to find. You're going to solve for the y value after setting the x value equaling 0. Anyway, what does this question ask? It says find the y-intercept of this equation. So how do we find the y-intercept? You set x equal to 0 and solve. So here's x. Just put a 0 right there. Let me rewrite it. 9 times 0 minus 8y equals 16. And that's really easy to do because anything times 0, it just disappears because it becomes 0. So in reality, all you have is this simple one-step equation, negative 8y equals 16. Again, let me reiterate what we did. Find the y-intercept. How do you find the y-intercept? To find the y-intercept, set x equal to 0. So here was x. I put a 0 right there. And solve. So let's solve this equation. 9 times 0 is 0. You could just erase it, cross it out. Negative 8y equals 16. That's really saying a negative 8 times y equals 16. Divide by negative 8, divide by negative 8, and you'll have your y-intercept answer, y equals negative 2. Now, that is the location of where your line will cross the y-axis. It crosses the y-axis at negative 2. Now, it does say type in the coordinate of the y-intercept. Give me the actual answer, the actual location, the actual coordinate. And the coordinate will be, as we did, we set x equal to 0. So it's 0, comma, the y value is negative 2, negative 2. There's your answer, 0, comma, negative 2. Please type this in with no spaces between your terms. Type in the parenthesis, the 0, the comma, the negative 2, no spaces, and the close the parenthesis. Hit enter, and that'll be your answer right there, 0, comma, negative 2, the ordered pair. In this question, it says rewrite the equation in standard form, and of course, type in your answer with no spaces between your terms. So the two things that we need to know, especially on this section, is standard form, which is ax plus by equals c. And again, we do the a, the b, and the c in capital letters to help us remember that we don't want fractions and we don't want decimals. We want these to be integers, nice numbers, right? And most of the time we want this a value to be a positive integer. Okay, so again, you want your x's and y's on the left side of your equal sign if they ask for standard form. Now, what other form are we getting quizzed on this quiz? Function form. And function means to get y by itself, solve for y. Now, in the future, I'm talking about maybe next week or so, we're going to realize that when you get y by itself, and then you have your x term and another number, that's going to ultimately be called slope-intercept form, right? But anyway, right now, function form just means get y by itself and the x and the number on the other side, okay? So just remember that y by itself is what function form is. So right here, they're asking us to rewrite this nasty-looking equation in standard form. So we want ax plus by equals c, and of course, we don't want fractions, we don't want decimals, and right here, I do have a fraction. So let's begin with that. Let's get rid of that fraction by multiplying everything by the denominator of that fraction that we want to get rid of. Everything by that denominator 3. So what do I have now? I have a 12x minus 15 equals, those 3's cancel, 2y. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We have the x, we have the constant value, and we have the y with the equal sign right here. So on standard form, we want the x's and the y's, we want both of them on the left side of the equal sign. And we want the number, the constant, all by itself on the right side. So this 15, I want it over here, and this 2y, I want it over here. Okay, I want to switch these two places. Now, you don't just do that. When it's an equation, to get rid of something, you got to do the opposite. In other words, if you want to move this minus 15 to the other side, you're going to have to do the opposite of minus 15, which is plus 15. That'll cancel out, plus 15. Let me rewrite what I have. I have a, I'm going to do it over here. I have a 12x. I have equals, I have a 2y plus 15, okay? So I moved the 15 over the other side. There it is. 15 is on the right side of the equal sign. Now I want my x's and y's on my left side of my equal sign. So I have my x on the left side, but I need my y on the left side. So I need to get rid of this 2y by subtracting 2y. Subtracting 2y. Now, of course, you can't really subtract x's and y's, right? They're not like terms, so you're just going to rewrite it, okay? We have a 12x minus 2y equaling 15. And ladies and gentlemen, this is your answer, your equation that's in vertex form. And of course, on the instructions, it says type it in with no spaces between your terms. That's exactly what I did here on the answer. 12x minus 2y equals 15. 12x minus 2y equals 15. I hope we understand this, so let's move on. When they ask you to rewrite an equation in standard form, that means to, well, first of all, you have to know what standard form actually means. It means ax plus by equals c. That means no decimals, no fractions, but more importantly here, that you have your x and your y on the left side of the equal sign with your constant, the number without a variable, on the right side. So when they ask you to rewrite an equation in standard form, that means to get the x and the y on the left side of the equal sign? Yes, absolutely. So that's for sure true. How about these other ones? Isolate x on the left side? Nope. How about isolating y on the left side? No, that would be function form, getting y by itself. Nope. And none of these are correct. Obviously, that first one was correct. So that's the only one that's correct on this particular question. Let's move on. Whoops, I forgot to cover up this one. Obviously, we know that one of these is correct. This one says none of these are correct, and that's not the right answer. But anyways, the range values are well, I hope we remember when we did make that machine. You guys remember that machine, that there was an input and an output? The input went into, let's say, it went into the x value. The input goes into the x value. So like, let's say you had the input of 4. So you would plug in the 4, the input, right into the x value. And that became 2 times 4, which is 8 plus 1. It came out as a 9, okay? So on the left side, the numbers that are going in, those are called the inputs. Not only that, you put them in to the x position, so they're also known as x values. Not only that, those are also known as the domain values. And we could even say that these are the independent values. Independent. Okay. Okay, again, inputs because you put the 4 into the machine, you put it into the x value, that's why we also call them x values. Domain, you have to memorize that. The values that go in are called the domain. And they're also called independent because I just randomly picked the number 4 and plugged it into this machine, right? 4 equals 2 times x plus 1. But the answer 9 is dependent on whatever, on this input 4. The answer 9 is dependent on the 4, because if I would have plugged in a 5, then the 9 wouldn't have come out. If I would have plugged in a 5, 2 times 5 is 10 plus 1, it would have been an 11. So the 11 would be dependent on the 5. So I hope we understand that these numbers that we plug in, we just plug in any numbers we want. Those are independent values. But the numbers that come out depend on that independent value. Okay, that 9 depends on the 4. If that 4 wasn't a 4, then that would not be a 9. Anyways, the 9 that comes out, that's called your output. Okay, how do we get that 9? Because we put in the 4, it came out a 9. Also known as your y values. Also known as your range. And also known as your dependent values. Dependent. Okay. Sorry about the misspelling there. Anyway, but the bottom line is, I hope we understand that the range values are what? The range are your outputs, they're your y values, they're your dependent values. So they're not your x values, so you're not going to pick that one. What does it say? The y values, yes. The outputs, yes. The dependent values, yes. All of those are the outputs, the range, right? Obviously, it's not the x values, and it's not. But why isn't it this last one? The y values, yes, that's true that the range are the y values. So the y values, the inputs, nope, the inputs are the ones that go in. Those are the x's, so that one can't be it. So this is the only one that's true. Y values, the outputs, the dependent values. I hope this makes sense. Let's move on. Rewrite the equation in function form. Again, that means solve for y, or you could say isolate y, or you could say get y by itself on one side of the equal sign. I guess you should know what that means, right? Function form, solve for y, get y by itself, right? So here's y, it's on the left side of the equal sign. It's definitely not by itself. You have this x term and you have this multiplication of -3 right in front of the y. So let's begin by getting rid of this minus 9x. So let's get rid of that minus 9x by doing the opposite of minus 9x, which is adding 9x. So plus 9x, and what you do to one side, do to the other. And of course, you can't add 6 and 9x. Those are not like terms, so we're just going to rewrite it. I'm going to rewrite it down here. I have a -3y. I have the equal sign. And instead of writing 6 plus 9x, let's get used to writing the x term first and the constant at the very end, okay? So I'm going to write positive 9x and then plus 6 because that's a positive 6. So I'm almost done. I almost have y by itself. All I need to do now is get rid of this multiplication of -3 right in front of the y. So I'm going to divide by a -3, divide by a -3, divide by a -3, divide everything by -3. That will cancel out. I will have y by itself. Y equals, what is 9 divided by -3? That's a -3. And of course, there's an x right next to it. And 6 divided by -3 is -2. This is my final function form equation. Y is by itself. In the future, this will be called slope-intercept form, but right now, function form is getting y by itself, and that's my answer. Type it in with no spaces between your terms. As you see here, y, no space, equal, no space, negative sign, no space 3, no space x, no space minus, no space 2. No spaces between your terms. Let's move on. Once again, the domain values, if you remember, the domain, the inputs, the x values, the independent values, those go into the machine, and you're going to have like a function in here, like a y equals 2x plus 1. And of course, you plug them into the x, and then you get out answers. Those are your range values, your outputs, your y values, your dependent. So if you know this, then when they ask you state the domain, and I give you coordinates, which are really ordered pairs, which are really x and y values. So they're asking you to state the domain. What are domain values? They're your inputs. They're your x values. Right here, you have a bunch of x values. Where are the x values? Well, you have an x value right here, that's 1, x value right there, -3, and x value right there, 7. So the domain values would be 1, -3, 7. Those are your answers. As you could see, there is no 1, -3, 7, so none of these are correct. So on this question, we have a standard form equation, and they want us to graph it. It's really easy to graph standard form equations by finding the x-intercept and the y-intercept. To find the x-intercept, set y equal to 0 and solve. To find the y-intercept, set x equal to 0 and solve. So you could show your work, right? I will show my work here. Let's actually find the x-intercept by setting y equal to 0 and solving. So I'm going to rewrite my equation. -2x minus 3 times 0 equals -6. Of course, the 3 times 0 is 0. It eliminates. So you really have the one-step equation, -2x equals -6. So what do you do there? You divide by -2, divide by -2, so you know your x-intercept is at +3. Your x-intercept is at +3. Now to find the y-intercept, you're going to set x equal to 0 and solve. So let me go back to my original equation, -2x, -2, but instead of x, I'm going to put a 0 right there, because they're telling us to set x equal to 0. And then -3y equals -6. And let's solve this thing. Again, multiplying by 0 is beautiful because you could just erase it, you could just cross it out. You really have a one-step equation here that says to divide by -3 to get rid of that multiplication of -3, giving you y equals +2, and that is your y-intercept, okay? So if you actually wanted the coordinates, your x value is 3, your y value is 0. How did I get y value of 0? Because we set y equal to 0. Over here for the y-intercept coordinate, you would say x equals 0, and your y value is 2. Obviously, your y value is 2. So which of these graphs crosses the x at 3 and the y at 2? So here's my x, that crosses at 3. This one crosses at -2 on the y. So it should be crossing here and here. It should be a line like this, but that's not it. This one crosses at 2, not at 3, so that's not it. This one crosses at 2, not at 3, so that's not it. And of course, if we keep going down, we see that none of these are the correct answer. Okay, so instead of actually going through the multiple choice answers, I'm actually going to do my x-intercept at 3. 1, 2, 3. There's my blue dot, my x-intercept dot. And then I have my y-intercept at 2. So let me go to the y-axis at 2 and put my red dot right there. And of course, my line is the line that goes through both that x and that y-intercept. So there's my graph. This is what I'm looking for, and that's obviously not there. Do you always have to show your work for the x-intercept and the y-intercept? At the beginning, I really do want you to show your work, but you could technically do this in your head. Why? Because you know to find the x-intercept, you set y equal to 0. It's as simple as this. If you know you set y equal to 0, you could just cover up that, and you will see that one-step equation, -2x equals -6. Oh, you got to divide by -2, divide by -2. Your x-intercept is +3. You don't really have to show your work for a one-step equation. Now, if you're not too comfortable with this, of course, please show your work the way I did. But that's how to find your x-intercept. To find your y-intercept, you're going to set x equal to 0 and solve. So that would simply mean to just cover it up. All you got to do is cover it up. And now you have a one-step equation right here to find your y-intercept value. This is really saying -3 times y. So divide by -3, divide by -3. You know that your y-intercept is 2. -6 divided by -3 is +2. So you could do this simply by covering up the y and solving for x, and that'll give you your x-intercept, and then covering up your x and solving for y, which will give you your y-intercept. And of course, why are we able to just cover up the x? Well, because we know that when we set x equal to 0, that just disappears. That's why we just cover it up and solve that one-step equation. All right, so I hope this helps. Let's move on to the next question.